was roads. Today, cities are about networked economy. It's about digital information that allows these cities to live and breathe. So I think the cities of the future can be created as a green field, but more importantly, 95% of that would be brown field, in terms of looking at the balance between the social infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and the economic infrastructure. And trying to balance this equation to ensure it's a sustainable city that attracts talent, that allows economic activity, but also creates the next generation of entrepreneurs who live in the city and collaborate with cities worldwide. So the integration, network, approach, and a more open manner in which diversity will have new ideas and new innovation will make these cities thrive and grow.
But do the cities we already have, do they need to be fundamentally and completely rewired? Their infrastructure gutted and begun again?
So we've been in recent times talking about smart cities, which is rewiring the existing infrastructure and trying to rebalance this in the ways of making the equation work between social, physical, and economic infrastructure. So for example, in the competitive index, today still New York and London top the chart. And the reason being, they're able to rebalance this equation despite the digital disruption that the new economy is getting. They're still number one in terms of, allowing labor to come in, allowing venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, and also embracing the digital transformation, whether it's in governance, education, or in the way a citizen of the city interacts with the government and regulatory bodies. And hence rewiring is in fact happening as we speak. But what's more important is, do we create a hub model or do we create brand new cities? And that's where the equation would be difficult to solve because we don't have an answer. It hasn't been done before. Most of the cities that grew in the last couple of years were historic cities of convenience.
Well, that's a rather wonderful cue into Fahd next to you, who is boss of a new city. In fact, the flagship new city here in Saudi Arabia, which I believe is projected to have 2 million people. When are you going to reach that ambitious 2 million figure, Fahd? Are you ever going to reach it, or is it a fantasy?
We're definitely going to reach it. When, nobody can tell you, because cities grow according to global economic factors, macroeconomic factors, as well as local. But I think this whole issue around cities and their competitiveness is very important. Cities are the most competitive space in the world. There are 247,000 cities that exist today. They compete for human resources, they compete for capital, and they definitely compete for corporate attention. Therefore, if you want to succeed, and by the way, most cities do not succeed, and most cities, even existing ones, shrink sometimes, and we see what happened with Detroit, for example.
That's right.
So you really have to know what's your competitive niche. Why do you exist? And continue to reevaluate this all the time. And it's all about governance. This is the big picture. Here's what we want to be. Is it succeeding? Is it not? What do we need to change? So this is the top-down view. You also need to have a bottoms-up view. You need to give the city back to the citizen. The ability to operate the city, to allow them to participate. By the way, this is really happening today around the world. With your mobile phone, you can take a photo of a pothole and send it to the municipality and tell them to fix it. This is the kind of technology that we're trying to install today in King Abdullah Economic City. The city has to also allow the citizen to succeed and thrive. So we're focused a lot on entrepreneurship, on education, and on producing a lifestyle of art, culture, and culinary experiences that allow us to attract people.
It's not so easy though, is it? Doing it from scratch, doing it without that sort of organic, evolutionary thing that comes with human beings acquiring experience over generations. You're trying to do it literally from a drawing board.
Yes, and it was actually quite difficult. We've been at it for a decade, and maybe now I can articulate only what we were trying to do. When you have a city existing like Riyadh or Jeddah, these are urban centers, and then you establish a new project that surrounds them. That's what we call a satellite city. It's hard, but not that hard, because you're attracting the demand that exists. What we have been doing over the past 10 years is inducing a new economic cycle that did not exist. That's why we focused on the port, building a port that is now 3 million containers, and by end of 2016 will be 4.5 million containers. We have attracted 120 companies. We are building residential units for all income levels. And this cycle is happening. Now, this is the hard infrastructure. You have the soft infrastructure, the focus on education, on tourism, on lifestyle, on healthcare, on education. So all of these areas are what make a city alive, a place to be.
I want to come back to what you call the sort of soft factors in the success and growth of cities, because I think it's very important. But let's keep moving down the panel. Ahmad, Al-Yamani, the simple opening question was, what in the 21st century is going to define the most successful cities? So what's your answer?
I think it's people. If I were to define the most important element, or the one element that would define a competitive city in one word, it's actually people. I tend to see that a lot of cities, whether existing or new field cities, try to attract corporates, and they do that very extensively. They succeed to certain degrees, and they assume that the people will follow because you will create the jobs and these jobs will bring the people. And I argue that this should not be the only thing. You start by attracting the businesses, that's a good start, but even at that point early on, you need to define what are the segments of people that you're trying to attract and what matters to them the most, and there has to be a dedicated research for this. And you prioritize as a city management what matters to these people, and then you work on creating that environment that attracts the people. I'm talking individuals, not businesses, and then communicate that environment or that effort towards creating an environment that is attractive to people. Because if you don't do this and you only attract the businesses, they'll probably survive for a while, but if they fail to attract the talent that you would like to have in your city, they will either have to shut down or shrink their business or relocate it, or...
Sorry to interrupt, but you're talking attraction on an international, global basis.
Precisely.
Yeah, well, so here's the question for you and for everybody in this room, given the answer I got when I asked about successful urban experience right now. Would you describe Riyadh, Jeddah, Dammam as right now as attractive cities where people from around the world want to come to live?
It's not. Neither of the three cities, and that applies to a lot of cities around the world. If you ask me, would you describe...
Well, I don't want you talking about other cities. I want you to focus on...
Would you describe Beijing or Shanghai, or would you describe Beijing or Shanghai or even London as an attractive city?
Yeah, no, all right, London. You push me on London. I would categorically describe London as an attractive place, a magnet city.
The short answer is no.
So why?
And it's very simple. These cities have deviated their attention from the individual that they're trying to attract. The individual is becoming a secondary attention point. And I argue that if you don't make the individual the first attention point, you will fail. And you'll probably succeed on indices. You'll be the #1 city in attracting capital, the #1 city in the global cities index. But over time, this cannot be sustainable because it's not attracting the right people at the end of the day.
Okay, we might come back to Saudi cities in a moment, probably with Fahd's input as well. But Arturo, you do a lot of work around the world consulting on cities and the future of cities. And I wonder, again, with the simple question, define a successful city for the 21st century, how you would answer it.
Well, out of the more than 200,000 cities that Mr. Al-Rasheed mentioned, there are 750 that account for almost 60% of the world's GDP. And the World Bank has just done a great study, competitive cities, in which many of us participated, analyzing those factors of success for these 750 cities. Now, the bad news is that out of those 750, only about 100 were growing faster than the countries that surrounded them. So that's less than 20% of them. But the good news is that in all the diversity of these cities, and we talked about many already in this panel alone, there is sort of a roadmap. There are some characteristics that they do share. Unsurprisingly, it begins with having a good plan. And a plan can take 5 months, or a plan can take 10 years. The plan is defined as good when it uses the strengths that the city has, when it's cohesive, when it's comprehensive, when it's been socialized. But most importantly, a good plan is one that is followed. So that's the first step. Now, after a plan, well, there are several factors that we've identified. have institutions that create a market-friendly environment. You have infrastructure, that you can, that services the land. But as it's been said here before, the critical element of a successful city is innovation. As I was coming in the walkway in the airport, there was an HSBC ad that said, an idea can stem out of anywhere. One of those HSBC ads, right?
Very annoying, mostly.
And that's true. That's true. Ideas can stem out of anywhere, but innovation doesn't. Actually, cities have always been the birthplace of innovation. Nothing has ever come out. Think about Greek philosophy. Think about the Renaissance. Think about the Industrial Revolution. Think about the digital revolution. It all came out of the urban context. And that is because it has two things. It has talented people working with each other. So proximity is a very important element. And the second thing is diversity. And when I say diversity, I mean true diversity. The US has 25% of its companies owned by foreigners. 50% of Silicon Valley was started by foreigners. That's double the rate of the average of the US. So proximity for generation of ideas and diversity are the two additional elements.
Okay, just as we're talking, a question comes to my mind, and Ashraf, maybe you can reflect on it. Arturo is from Mexico, and I guess has a lot of experience of Mexico City, which is one of the world's mega cities. You are based in Cairo, another of the world's mega cities. I have experience of a bunch of mega cities, including Lagos, for example. And I'm just wondering whether we can now conclude that the world's biggest cities on the whole, particularly in the emerging world, economy world, are not the greatest places to talk about innovation and 21st century success stories, because they are too big. And if you just think about simple things like traffic flows and the proximity issues, they're out of control and they are just not functioning properly. So is size something that works against cities?
There's no doubt about it, but we can't correlate size directly to innovation in a city like Cairo, because you still have a lot of innovation coming out of it. It's just the living standards are just horrible in a sense. But to talk about cities making change in the 21st century, Cairo has been one of those cities that has made dramatic change and has been a reason for dramatic change. And today is the 25th of January, which is the anniversary of the Egyptian Revolution of 2011. And that came from Cairo. That came from one of the biggest cities in Africa, if not the biggest city. But here is the problem. Like everything with Egypt, we have this concept of big government, very centralized government, and we've looked at Cairo as being the most competitive city in Egypt. As a matter of fact, we've made it so competitive that now it's become fat and very inefficient, and like you said, there is just absolutely no way you can get from point A to point B without pulling your hair out. And that's why we smoke a lot in Egypt, because you're always stuck in traffic. But that's exactly it. If we look at Alexandria, for example, one of the most beautiful cities on the Mediterranean, I mean, not a lot of people have gone to visit it, even if you have been to Egypt. The same would be true with Luxor and Aswan if it wasn't for just, their touristic and historical value. Everything new happens in Cairo. Everything good comes to Cairo. Every new business is open in Cairo. So we're looking at a greater area of 22 million people. We have a population density in Cairo of about 19,368 people per kilometer